Okay, well, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome. My name is Suzanne Boyd. I'm the founder and CEO at Anthro-Tech. Thank you for joining for the webinar titled Stop Guessing, Start Journey Mapping, How to Improve the Customer Experience. I see familiar names in our attendee list, and I know that many of you here today care deeply about creating a great customer experience. But we all know that can be super challenging, especially in government, where even simple services often span multiple departments and channels and systems. So journey mapping helps us see the experience through the eyes of the customer to uncover where the friction is happening and to identify opportunities to make services better. I am joined by a fantastic panel here today. I look forward to the intros in a moment. Each of our panelists has worked with Anthro-Tech to improve customer experience through journey mapping. So we are bringing a lot of real-world experience to the conversation today. A quick housekeeping rule before we start our conversation. Please note that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can submit questions at any time. We have about 15 minutes left at the end of the session to answer your questions. So just please pop them in there as they come up. And without further ado, I would like to start with introductions. Starting with you, Lisa, if you could please share your name, your role, where you work.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Lisa Rutzick. I'm a product manager on the customer experience team, which was created about 4 years ago at the Department of Construction and Inspections at the City of Seattle. We also call that SDCI. I've actually been at the department for about 25 years. And prior to joining the customer experience team, my background is in land use, urban planning, and urban design.
Welcome, Lisa. Let's go to you, Jenna.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Stenson. I'm the Permit Services Manager in the Planning and Community Development Department at the City of Shoreline in the state of Washington. If you're not aware, Shoreline is an inner ring suburb with approximately 66,000 people. My background is also in urban planning, and I previously worked for the City of Seattle for 6 years, a couple of those years, which were also on the CX team. When I was on that team, the work I did focused on code compliance and housing programs, so a bit different than your everyday. I've also had the pleasure of working with both Tori and Lisa on projects while I was at the City of Seattle, so it's great to be back in the room with them.
That's right. Thanks for taking the time, Jenna. Over to you, Tori, for intros.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tori Leonard. I am a human-centered design coach and the UX practice director at Anthro-Tech. I've been working with dozens of different county, state, and federal organizations over the last 10 years or so, practicing human-centered design and using techniques like customer journey mapping with those organizations. And yeah, as Jenna and Lisa mentioned, I have gotten to work personally directly with Jenna and Lisa, so I'm excited for us to reunite and talk a little bit about our journey mapping experiences today.
Great.
Yeah,
Welcome.
I feel like the band is back together.
Yeah.
The
I
band is
love
back.
it.
That's great. Well, thank you all for being here today. Before we get into the discussion, we want to do a quick audience poll to see how familiar everyone in the room is with journey mapping. So you should see a little pop-up on your screen. Let us know, how familiar are you with journey mapping? Are you new to it? Are you somewhat familiar with it? Or are you already using journey mapping in your organization? Now I should see some results here. And that is what I was expecting. We've got a mix of expertise in the room, which is wonderful because we'll have something for everyone today, whether you're new to it or an expert. Okay, so we're going to start with the basics here. What is customer journey mapping? And I know, Tori, as you just mentioned, you've helped many different types of organizations really map out complex customer experiences. So break it down for us. How do you define journey mapping, and what should people expect to see in a finished journey map?
Okay. I have a few examples to show because I think sometimes it's easier to understand when you can see. And I'll just sort of flip through these. But essentially, customer journey mapping is a way for us to understand what people experience when they're interacting with a service or a product of any kind. A journey map is going to show you things like what customers are trying to do when they access a service, what steps they go through to access and use that service, how they're feeling throughout that process, all the ups and downs and pain points and moments of joy, and where they get stuck or frustrated. Customer journey mapping is something that helps teams understand what people experience when they're interacting with their organization. And it shows them each of the steps that a customer might take when they're trying to complete a certain activity with your organization. Um, let's see. It also shows like where people struggle. Sometimes we'll indicate this indicates these little red dots are different pain points for this voter on this journey, so that we can start to identify where are the opportunities to improve that might overall make a big difference in the overall experience with this service. One of the things that I like to call out is that a journey map in itself is just an artifact. This is summarizing valuable research that you've done with your customer in a way that's easier to consume and communicate and actively use with your teams and stakeholder groups. So the real value really comes from the research that you did to develop the journey map, as well as the conversations and the design decisions that you can make using the journey map as a summary of that research from the past.
Thank you, Tori. And I see from the visuals here that you're tracking not just tasks, what the person is doing, but also how they're feeling about what they're doing in the moment. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. I think the key pieces that you want to include in a journey map, I'll use this car buying example, are understanding like the steps or the stages of the journey across the top, what the actions are that that customer or user is taking at each of those steps or stages of that journey, and how are they feeling at each of those steps of that journey. So you can quickly see right here, oh, okay, when they're financing and paperwork, when they're trying to buy a car, that's where they're the most frustrated, worried, concerned. That's a pivotal moment in the car buying process where everything could go wrong. They need the most help or they feel the most uncertain. Underneath those emotions, we also want to highlight things we learned about pain points that they might be happening. So again, at that financing and paperwork point, they're frustrated because there's complicated financing terms, hard credit checks, lots of paperwork, maybe some hidden fees.
Yeah.
So when you see those pain points, you might want to say, okay, what opportunities are there to improve? There might be, we could make clearer financial information or provide payment calculators or digitize the process of signing for some of these things that may have been kind of clunky and paper-based in the past. So the journey map can include all of these different things. A lot of journey maps that I love also include real quotes from customers. So you can see them a little better on this one, which is actually for the city of Seattle, where we have some real quotes here to also articulate like what customers are thinking and saying during this point in their journey.
Thank you. That's the car example is definitely relatable. I see the dip in emotions there. And I see that you've got like opportunities for improvement in those spots where the emotions are dipping and people might be anxious or frustrated. So it does a nice job of visualizing that whole journey. Thank you for those examples. Let's talk about some practical projects that you've been part of and have used journey mapping for. So I'd like to turn to Lisa next. Lisa, can you tell us about a project where you used journey mapping and maybe start with what did you use it for? How did it help? Just talk us through your experience.
So, as I mentioned, I'm at the Department of Construction and Inspections, which means that we are responsible for permitting all new construction on private property. So that the project that I'm thinking of, I want to talk about is where we did a journey mapping exercise looking at the time period between when an application is submitted by a customer, and comes in the door, and then through until the point that we issue the permit back to the customer. For this exercise, we decided intentionally to focus on smaller sized residential projects. So think of somebody who lives in a single family home and wants to add an addition onto their home, or add a second story, or perhaps add a residential unit above their garage, or maybe even build a completely new separate accessory dwelling unit in a separate building on their site, on their property. So these are often regular people who are applying for permits for their home where they live. And we wanted to start small and simple because the process can get quite big and complicated. But the thought was that if we can start small and figure out the issues that the person who isn't familiar with our process and our all of our steps and our resources, if we can figure out the issues that they encounter and resolve those, then that benefits all of our customers, regardless if it's a downtown high-rise or if it's that single-family home. So what we did is we actually did 3 customer journey mapping exercises. The first 2 were for external customers. We talked to architects or design professionals, as well as homeowners, to better understand the steps they go through, the experiences they have, and to do this holistically, really kind of understand their mindset at the beginning of the process, during the process, and then at the end after they receive their permit. But we also wanted to interview staff because they're the other half of the equation in this journey process. And so they're kind of end users themselves, even though they're not external customers, but really understanding what they're going through as they're navigating through the process on the city side. And again, asking questions to understand their experience moving through the process. And from there, we mapped out these 3 separate journeys from those 3 different user groups.
Lisa, I'm curious, after you went through that exercise of mapping the 3 journeys, were there any big sort of aha moments like, wow, I was not expecting that, or I came into this with an assumption?
Yeah, I think that the one that really pops out in my mind was we actually overlaid the 3 journey maps together, and you could very clearly visually see that the pain points of one user group became the pain point of the other user group. And I thought this was really compelling because it can be a fairly adversarial process. Nobody really wants to get permits. Everybody wants it to go faster. There's a lot of tension there. But kind of immediately having this visual that spotlighted this kind of shared dip in the experience, I thought could create the possibility of building more empathy between the user groups to understand that they, by all being invested in looking for solutions, that it benefits everybody involved. And I do think that played out, that seeing those 3 journeys side by side and then overlaid really did help staff understand and build empathy for their external customers. And then we're able to engage in conversations about solutions and helping solve problems that they themselves have been slogging through for many years, or workarounds that they're dealing with. So I found that was really that surprised me. And I thought that was really a compelling aha moment. The other thing that I thought about that I didn't quite expect was that because we were seeing this intersection, this sort of dip in the experience by all the users, it really begged the question about, are there other solutions or information that we need to elevate and prioritize as part of this project that we had kind of thought were out of scope, but would have important, meaningful impacts to the customer journey. So that was sort of another aha moment, was like, I think we might need to be expanding our scope a little to really get at the issues that we're seeing on this journey map.
Fascinating. And so when you talked about overlaying the journey maps and seeing a shared dip, what was that dip? Where was the friction in the process?
Yes, thank you for asking. I didn't talk about that. So really what what happens is the application comes in the door, and then the frustration begins because the applicant is very excited. They've submitted an application, they've gotten through that milestone, and then it lands on a staff person's desk, and then they're reviewing the application and then identifying lots of corrections that are needed and sending those corrections out. And that is called a correction cycle. And that correction cycle can happen more than once. And that creates some frustration then for the applicant who thought they did a great job submitting their application. And now they're having to go back and forth to resolve things. So the questions that naturally come up are the applicants not understanding the code requirements? Are we taking in applications that aren't satisfactory? Are applicants not understanding our code and how to present the information in response to that code? So these are the questions that really are focusing on what's happening in the applicant world, in the applicant journey before they submit an application. And as I mentioned, we had originally, that was kind of our starting point, is when the application is submitted forward, but this kind of forced us to step back and say, okay, what's actually happening before then? So it's kind of like the car example, where when somebody walks into a car dealership, the person working there has no idea what the person walking in knows or doesn't know, what research they've done, what resources they've looked at. Unlike the car dealership, we know exactly what resources are out there because we actually control that information and provide resources and coaching. And so we have a lot more kind of power in the situation to affect how people are digesting information and affecting their ability to submit better applications to us.
Yeah. The word correction cycle in and of itself makes me anxious. I can imagine that was frustrating for customers, but also for staff having to deal and manage those corrections. So one more question on this. What solution did you come up with?
So because of that specific realization, we did decide to expand the scope. And rather than just focusing on the application and plan review part of the process, to step back and look at the preparing to apply process. And by doing that, we could then come up with recommendations for that early part of the process that directly impact and have ripple effects throughout the application review process. So I think that was a really important sort of realization and gave us momentum to do that expanded scope.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. Jenna, let's go to you. I know you've used journey mapping for a slightly different situation than Lisa's, where there wasn't a service yet. You had to design it. So tell us about your project.
Yeah. First of all, I can't stop smiling just because I also work in permitting. So much of this just rings true. The permitting problems are universal. Yeah, so for my example, Suzanne, I'm going to harken back to my City of Seattle days. I also worked at the Department of Construction Inspections like Lisa, and the organization there, the housing programs at the City of Seattle are actually housed in the Code Compliance Division. And so during COVID, the Seattle City Council was coming up with a lot of creative ideas on how to help renters during that time. And they came up with a program called the Economic Displacement Relocation Assistance Ordinance. And we were given about 6 months to make that happen in a software system. I'm also going to call the program EDGER from here on out because that's just too much of a mouthful for me to keep tripping over. Anyways, the program had such good intention. It was created to just try and address housing cost increase. Rent control is illegal in Washington state, so this was a unique ordinance to try and place limits on housing costs without enacting rent control. The program started July 1st, 2022, and it allowed tenants earning 80% or less than the area median income to apply for relocation assistance when their housing costs increased by 10% or more within the same 12-year period. So that's like a huge mouthful, and I'm sure it already sounds confusing to anyone that wants to like fill out an application. Um, so I was helping lead the team that implemented the program, and we were using the city's permitting software. So 6 months to design it. Didn't feel like enough time, but I was working with a great group of individuals, including the folks here at Anthro-Tech and the City of Seattle's IT team. And we put our head together and we were like, okay, we need to design this program. Of course, there's not a lot of other examples of this type of program across the United States. I think that maybe there was one in Canada when we were looking at kind of best practices, but not a lot to rely on. So we just started heavily relying on UX tools, which include customer journey mapping in this case. So I'm super happy Lisa's example went first because she was kind of giving a little bit more of like the traditional journey mapping model. And this is a little bit different, but I think a unique way and still a great way to use customer journey mapping because we used it to help design the program itself. We started by doing some informational interviews. So we really just wanted to ground in the customer's experience, especially because we knew customers were already going to be coming to us struggling with housing costs and housing instability. And that's really tough. So we started, those interviews that we did were just super powerful. They helped us even more understand how to design the program. And we were just trying to make it as low barrier as possible while still complying, of course, with all the fun rules and regulations in government. And so in this case, journey mapping gave us a roadmap to kind of start and design the program to the best of our ability. It was such a useful tool, and it really helped us set us up for a successful launch of the program, which we did on time, which was incredible.
Fantastic example. So they're similar to Lisa's example. There was research going into the journey map as well, into the
Yeah,
pre-
yeah, there was. So I mentioned we started with those informational interviews. We learned so much from tenants that were already, of course, the challenges that I kind of outlined about housing cost increase and housing instability was not new to Seattle. So we did some user research and kind of just learned ahead of time of like these emotions and folks were experiencing kind of that emotional line. We were able to help really kind of start to map that out. And then, of course, start to add in the program as we knew we were going to build it. But also, it really just helped ground in kind of like the humanness of the process, the emotions folks were having. And then it also, those interviews just took us so far. I think it helped guide us in some of the decisions we made. Um, and yeah, Tori helped us with some of that research. Maybe she can help chime in on some of the research because it was just so profound and really helped kind of guide us.
Yeah, I think what I remember really clearly is that the team did a good job of recruiting people who had recent experience with housing instability or needing to having to move because of a substantial rent increase that they couldn't afford, people that would be eligible for this new program once it went live. And some of the things that I remember learning, we learned that we mapped into our customer journey and then factored into the plan for developing the program were things like, of course, like what's the emotional state that people are going through at this
Mhm.
moment, but where do they look first for help when they get that notice of a rent increase? What keywords are they searching? Where are they looking to get help or find information of what they can do? Because that gives us an idea of like what kind of language should we be using for this program so that when people are looking for it, if they find it, that it pops up in their search results and it seems relevant to their situation. Another thing that really stood out to me that was kind of unexpected is we knew that we had to implement this program and we knew it would have to be in this online permitting tool, but early in the interviews, we found out that a lot of the people that were likely to qualify for this program did not feel comfortable submitting the required information online and had preferential had access to fax machines in like their local community center or apartment buildings and would feel more secure faxing in an application with their personally identifiable information and financial information and those kinds of things than they would entering it into an online portal. And that made it really clear to us early on that it was just as important that we had a paper process and application that was easy to fill out and fax in, or even come downtown and turn in at the same time as the online experience launched, because there was probably a 50-50 chance people were going to be more likely to use the online or paper versions of that process.
Thank you for sharing. That's such an important discovery in terms of how people want to interact and provide information, as well as what you're talking about, people's emotional state and context, and to keep that in mind as you design the program. So the journey map really becomes the North Star. Any big aha moments for you in this process, Jenna?
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned before. I mean, Tori raised some great points. We were kind of like head down thinking about the digital process, and we did have to make some pivots on thinking about a paper process, on thinking about other ways, just because folks were already in such an emotional state. They're already not trusting the government, and how can we kind of meet them where they're at? I just think the customer journey map just grounds so much in the humanness of the process. It's so easy for us in government. I mentioned I also work in permitting. We're on this side of it, and we're like, here's the process, X, Y, and Z. And I think customer journey mapping, those informational interviews, they just brought so much emotion into the EDRA program. And we were really able to elevate those voices, and we were really able to say, kind of point leadership in the direction that our customers needed, and not necessarily where, sometimes we think we know best as staff. And when you do a customer journey map, you're just not always on target. And bringing the customer voice in this way just really helps point you towards like a North Star, and saying, and maybe in Lisa's traditional area, it's saying maybe these are the pain points. And in this case, it was saying, hey, maybe we don't know everything and we're wrong, and we need to maybe design this a little differently than we thought.
Yeah, great. We saw earlier in our poll results that some folks are just getting started with journey mapping. They are interested. So I wonder, Tori, for agencies who want to try this, what does the step-by-step process of creating a journey map look like?
Yeah. I think that we sent out a kind of a checklist of a step-by-step process, but if I had to kind of summarize it, the first thing you need to do when you're creating a journey map is decide what journey you need to map and who your customer is. Like, what's the scenario and who is the customer? And this is important because different customers might have totally different journeys for the same experience. Like Lisa was mentioning, homeowners versus architects. A homeowner is going to have a totally different experience applying for their first permit ever than an architect who does this every week. And so really getting clear about who the customer is that you want to, learn about and design for, and then what is the journey you want to map, and then do research with those customers, interview them, survey them, look at any data you have access to in your systems to start to understand directly from them what is it that they're experiencing along this journey. And make sure you're asking a lot of open-ended questions there and not assuming very much. Like, wherever you think you know something, turn that into a question instead. You might be right, but you could be really wrong. And those moments where you might be wrong could be the biggest like insights that you can use to inform your journey map or inform process improvements. Once you have that research, then you start to turn it into the journey map by taking the information you gathered and mapping it out. What are the steps they've gone through? What are they doing at those steps? How are they feeling at those steps? What pain points did they share or point out along those steps? Once you do that, you start to naturally notice like high points and low points in that journey. And both of those are really important because a high point can tell you something good is happening here. What are we doing that is helping making something good happen here? And can we replicate it elsewhere? Or what does that tell us about what's important to this person while they're on this journey? And the low points obviously show you where there's a lot of friction, a lot of pain, and something that probably could use a closer look to solve for. But one of the most important parts of creating a journey map is not just doing this like me, myself alone with my research data, but getting together with my team to review and build this journey map together so that as you identify those high and low points, you can discuss where the opportunities for improvement are and what the ideas are for how you can improve it and start to document those and make this into like a living document that helps you take action. It's not just supposed to be like a
A
document
beautiful
that,
map.
yeah, like a static object. It's a tool for you to use. And the way you use it as a tool is bringing teams together to review, discuss, generate ideas, prioritize which ideas you have will make the biggest impact on the journey or are the most feasible to take action on right now versus later, things like that.
Yeah. Jenna and Lisa, that speaks to the power of journey mapping to build empathy, come up with solutions together, and bring other stakeholders in the fold, almost like a organizational change management strategy. Can you talk a little bit about how you involved folks in that process and what it did to create buy-in for the direction you were going in with solutions?
I can respond to that. I think as Tori just described, both at the start of the session, but also just now, that the map itself is kind of the end product. It's the artifact. But what's equally important as that map is the entire process leading up to that point and talking to all the people and doing the user research. So, asking questions, listening, learning, and then communicating that back to everyone involved. And so you kind of touched on the change management piece, which is sort of an accidental, but really important part that's built into this process, because, and I think I had mentioned this early on with my aha moment, that the empathy sort of comes naturally, and we're including everybody who's involved or impacted, from the external customer to the frontline staff. So there's sort of this shared understanding of the current state, and then an excitement to explore solutions. And so I like to think of it as kind of a like win, 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 win process because you're talking to people and learning from them about the problem that you have in hand or what you think you have at hand. By doing this, you're also engaging in change management steps. At the same time, you're building empathy, and you're ending up with this really powerful, like clear visual that can communicate to the people involved as well as other people who need to understand what you're working on, about the project and what you're working towards in terms of solutions. But it also can help, at least for staff, we have a lot of different disciplines who are reviewing projects, and we tend to be kind of focused heads down on that specific discipline. But by taking a step back and engaging this process and seeing this map, it also kind of lets people think a little bit outside of their silo of their discipline, towards the kind of the larger process or policy or the technologies that are involved. So that I think it also prompts people to think a little bit more broadly. So it's kind of, I think the process is a great tool that is very well-rounded in bringing people along and leading to better solutions.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. Anything to add, Jenna?
I think Lisa really nailed it. So
She did.
yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Super. I can't remember who said it, but we talked about not only documenting moments of friction and frustration and pain, but also moments of delight. Why is it important to also document those moments where the customer was happy? So why document both sort of the bad and the good?
I have an example I would love to share if you, yeah, okay. So on another permitting related project, we actually were mapping the customer journey through the building inspection process. So after you got your permit, you've built your building and you're getting inspections done at different points while you're building the building. And we mapped that customer journey and we noticed that the only high point in the inspections process and a very high point with very enthusiastic and lovely comments from customers was the moment when they got to meet an inspector on site for an inspection and actually talk
Mm.
to them and understand directly from the inspector the results of that inspection and what they might need to do next. The other thing we saw in that journey map is that not everybody gets that experience because earlier in the process, there was nothing consistent about how inspections were scheduled and communicated to tell the customer when the inspector was going to be there. So they couldn't always predict or just be happen to be around when the inspector showed up to do their inspection. And so by noticing that the high point, like the best thing about the inspections was interacting with the city inspectors, we were able to communicate to the team why that was so important, that we could come up with a way, like what customers needed was a way to predict and know when the inspector was going to be there, not only because they enjoy that conversation, but also after that high point their outcomes are much better if they got to talk to the inspector versus if they didn't, and now they're left guessing and digging through the portal for information about their inspection, trying to figure out what they have to do, if they passed it, if they failed it, what they need to do next. So we use that information about that high point to say, like, how do we amplify this? How do we make this more consistent across all of the different inspections? And we found one group was already calling customers every in the morning before they went out for the day and telling them, we'll be there between this time and this time, and confirming the type of inspection it was. And they'd seen great things from that practice, not only eliminating going out to inspections that the customer wasn't actually ready for and rescheduling them before showing up and no one being there, no one being prepared, but also more customers able to meet with the inspector during the inspection. So we used that great example from that one, I think it was the electrical group, and we told all the other inspector groups, we want this to be the standard practice for all inspection types going forward. And they were excited to adopt it, and they did it in like
Yeah.
less than 3 weeks from saying like, this works, let's do this, to implementing it as policy and practice. And saw lots of benefits, not only for the customer to have that better experience, but also for the inspectors to know when they go out for the day that all the job sites they're going to visit are ready for them. It's the right inspection for them. They're going to have access to it. They're not going to be locked out. All those sorts of things got resolved by this one little change that we only noticed because the best part of the journey was when the customer got to
That's
meet the
such a cool-
inspector.
Yeah, that is such a cool example. I love that. Yeah. And also for the inspectors to hear, that they were a bright spot in the journey,
I
and to
think that's,
replicate that.
I think a lot of times in especially in government organization, there can be hesitancy to ask for customer feedback because there's a fear that it will all be bad.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the other part about doing this research and mapping these journeys is you often find that when they actually get to interact with people in your organizations, customers are usually much happier. It's some of the other barriers that we put in between the customer and our staff that sometimes cause the most friction and pain points and confusion. So
Yeah,
good to realize.
great example. Jenna, Lisa, feel free to add to that if you want to. Um,
Yeah, well, Suzanne, I think your question was about the highs, right? The moments of delight. I think
Yep.
that I think it's awesome. I mentioned before about bringing the customer voice in. Um, they're happy during certain parts of their journey, and I think we just like skip over those. But I think we've used different words, and I really think of the journey map as helping as like a roadmap with some of my experiences. And I think it really is wonderful because it can highlight the good areas, it can highlight the bad areas. And I'm sure we've all experienced this, but sometimes um, leaders are really set on this one thing that they think is the most important thing. And sometimes there's lots of value in that, and sometimes maybe it's a little off the mark, but like how do you show that or prove that? And I think the customer journey map can get you there, right? And so it can say, actually, we're doing really good in this area. Our customers are happy. They're meeting with inspectors on site. They're so
Yeah.
happy. And so maybe we should actually put some of our resources and focus in this other area where, the emotion would be a frowny face or they're struggling with this sort of the process or whatever. And so I think it can really help put some momentum into decision making. It can help provide that guidance that you need. And it's just like a good tool to help refocus the work where you really need to improve the customer experience instead of just guessing.
Yeah. Take the guesswork out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lisa, any additions from you?
I think that it's nobody, well, nobody loves to just hear about all the things they do wrong or that are bad or that are negative. And as city workers, I feel like that is kind of the standard. So I think it's equally important for all the reasons that Jenna and Tori talked about to collect the good parts. Because it can help us, it helps us understand where we can allocate or prioritize resources. B, in Tori's example, it taught us what a solution might be to another area. Something that was working well became the solution in another area. And also, like, just reiterating what Jenna said, like, different people in leadership or staff have different ideas about solutions. And maybe if something's already working and it's not broken, we can just take it off the list. And it might not be on my list, but it might be on somebody else's list. So you've got some evidence to prove that or to make the case for it. And then also, of course, is just generally you want a compliment a compliment sandwich is always much easier to digest than just like hearing the complaints. So being able to talk about the good along with the bad creates a much more balanced, nuanced, version of reality. So I think it's important for all the reasons that we've all been talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, you mentioned change management before, Suzanne, and the first step is usually like awareness of the need for change. The customer journey gives you that. And so I think that's why I just love it.
Yeah, no, and that also speaks to sharing your journey maps more broadly because some like the example of the inspector being the point of the line. I mean, I think that is scalable to many other processes and journeys where there is some in-person touch point or you talking to a human. So, yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap up here with a question around any advice you have for agencies that are just starting out. I'd like to start with you, Lisa. What's the best way to start?
It can all look and feel kind of daunting. So I say just start really simple. Identify a part of a process or of your business that you want to focus on and identify 5 customers that you would like to learn from and come up with 5 questions you want to ask each of them and take really good notes and just start there. And you can always add more, but that will give you some really, really useful, valuable information, even just at five interviews. So yeah, start small, and then you can always scale up. But you'll get some really, really valuable nuggets of information, even from just 3 interviews. But go for 5, but keep it simple and small. Yeah.
Yeah. Even as an individual contributor, you can do that, right? Like you don't need a big team to get started. Yeah. Great. How about you, Jenna?
Yeah, I think with the example I used, I wouldn't recommend to folks doing customer journey mapping by design for your first time. It's a super great tool, but it does feel like you're kind of like, what's the phrase, like building the bus while you're driving it. And yeah, just tons of fun mistakes you can make along the way. So like Lisa said, pick an existing process that's not working well. Do some interviews with staff and customers and create a journey map. I'm honestly just been kind of like going through my head here about what I can be doing here at the city of Shoreline as we've been talking because we have the same issues, right? We have a customer satisfaction survey. We hear great things all the time about how great our staff is to work with and wonderful, joyous compliments. And then we also hear horrible things about our process, and it's like a mismatch, right? And so I think I could use the customer journey mapping tool to just give a vision of where the improvements are needed, show me where I can focus my efforts, and then I know I'm pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, beautiful. Tori.
Yeah, or maybe if you could find a spot where like it sounds like they're meeting with your staff and they're happy then. Is there another point where they could interact with a human earlier on so they're not suffering all the way up until that point or whatever it is? Yeah, I would reiterate everything Lisa and Jenna said, but just kind of going back to those steps, just identify the customer journey you want to learn about or improve, do some research with that group, and if it's a bigger journey, like permitting is a huge journey, break it into pieces. Like Lisa said, she started with application to issuance of a permit, and then later learned we actually have to go back and learn everything they do before they apply. But it's okay to take it off into segments, into chunks, because if you take on too big of a thing, you won't get very detailed information in your journey map. You'll be summarizing too much information. So zoom in a little bit on a more specific part of that journey. And finally, I would say, although you can get started alone, the power of the journey map is to be able to share the insights from that research. So make sure you start working with a team where you can start to map out your insights from that research into the journey map itself, and then start to talk about opportunities for improvement and ideas for solutions. You don't want to do that alone. I think you'll have a much more impactful outcome of journey mapping if you do that together with a group, because then you will start to build that sort of shared understanding of the customer experience, shared understanding of opportunities, and shared understanding of the prioritized ideas for improvement that are actually coming from, your team and the people that you're working with, instead of just from, me, myself alone, my
Yeah.
ideas. It becomes a group output, and then, yeah, a really helpful communication tool so you can take it to leadership or take it to other audiences and explain why you want to fix this and this and how you think it'll improve the customer journey.
Yeah, thank you, Tori. We're going to pull up one more poll and then open the floor for Q&A. I already have one question there. Everyone in the room, please let us know, what challenges are you hoping journey mapping can solve? And this is a select all, so there may be more than one challenge you're trying to solve for at the moment. And we'll take a look at the results and then we'll get ready for Q&A. There we go. Take a look. Biggest problem we're trying to solve for: broken or inefficient processes. Good place to focus. Then coming in at 17 out of 30 votes, customer complaints or low satisfaction or getting buy-in. And you talked a lot already about the journey map as a way to make the journey visible and get buy-in from others, and then teams working in silos. So these are great. Thank you for sharing your challenges.
Can I make a comment on some of those? I think
Let's go to
cool.
Let's go
Sorry.
to the question, because
Okay,
I have a feeling your comment might answer some of the questions.
that's fine.
Starting with the first one here, and I think my panelist can read with me. It sounds like it could be beneficial to create multiple journey maps, particularly when building software solutions for each persona found to represent the end users of an application. Is there a limit to how many should be created, or best practices to identify where the journey maps should be focused across the different end users, especially if there's limited time and resources, like many of the state IT projects?
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely think, well, how do I answer that? So there's no like hard limit on how many customer journey maps you can create. But when you identify your personas, you want to think about grouping people together into persona groups based on their experience, their knowledge, their needs, their aspects of that persona group that makes them have a shared perspective, a shared need when interacting with your organization. So most likely you'll probably end up with somewhere between 3, 5 persona groups. Once you really try to like pay attention to differences in needs and experiences that might impact how they interact with you. Um, so I would maybe start around there, 3 to 5. But if you have to prioritize further, I would think about, what is your goal? Are you trying to simplify this experience? Then I would definitely focus on journey mapping the experience for the customers with the least knowledge and experience coming to your product or system, like Lisa did with homeowners for a small project on their house. Because if you find a way to simplify that process for the people with the least knowledge and resources available to them to figure it out on their own, it's going to kind of raise the tide for all boats for everybody else when you
Yeah,
make those improvements. That might be one way to, pick a priority user group to start with.
that's good advice. Jenna, anything to add? I see you're off mute.
I know I would just Tori's last point there on just like designing for your user group that cha is the most challenge. I've got that permitting mindset, so it's usually homeowners for us, right? And then the design professionals, the architects, the process also improves for them. And so, as someone who also works in government and knows that there's limited time and resources, usually I'm like, okay, my homeowner is who struggles the most, and this is who I'm going to start with because I might not be able to do one for everybody, but I know that if I improve the process for this user group, it is going to help, you know, my design professionals are going to be happy too because they're already not having as hard of a time.
Yeah, yeah, great. Next question. How is the customer journey map different from a service blueprint? And do you have any suggestions for how to organize next steps once you've identified the opportunities, pain points to work on? So 2 questions. Let's start with the first one, difference between journey map and service blueprint.
I feel like this is a quiz for you, Lisa and Jenna. What did you learn?
Oh no.
Right. Well, I had the same question not that long ago. I'll answer the first part of it, which is how is the customer journey map different from a service blueprint? So I think of the service blueprint as the next step after you've done the journey map, because the journey map is really focusing on just that user group's experience through the process. The service blueprint shows all players involved, the back of house and the front of house. So everything that's happening on the city's end, everything that's happening on the customer's end, all of the little tiny steps along the way. The journey map is more, I think of it as kind of more a little bit high, maybe 10,000 feet, whereas the service blueprint is like at 3,000 feet. So you're kind of stepping into a little more details, more of the nitty gritty, the ins and outs, the back and forthing between the front of house and back of house. And you're taking the information from the journey map, the sentiment that you've learned, and plugging that into the service blueprint. So you're seeing the sentiment is integrated along with all of those steps. And then you really can like start to kind of hone in on the processes or the steps that are creating those friction points. That would be that's my answer and my understanding of the two. How did I do, Tori?
I think that's a great answer. Absolutely. Like,
okay, good.
To create a service blueprint, you have to have a customer journey. And then that's the backbone of the service blueprint. But then the service blueprint says, oh, wow, we saw the customer journey. What is happening, like that's visible to the customer and behind the scenes that is creating that experience? And that's what you're blueprinting or you're mapping in the service blueprint is looking at the customer journey. What are we doing that's visible to the customer? What are we doing behind the scenes? What technology and processes and teams are involved? And that level of detail can get you really to pinpoint specific problems, maybe in your back-end business processes or customer communications or whatever that might be contributing to the positive or negative parts of that customer journey.
Yeah, great. That's helpful. Any suggestions for how to organize next steps once you've identified the pain points and the opportunities? How do you get organized? How do you prioritize? All of that.
Okay, I'll jump in.
No, you go. Oh, actually, I want Tori to go.
Okay.
You'll do a much better job.
So once you've identified those pain points and opportunities, you will need to do some prioritization, and you can use different like prioritization tools. Sometimes an easy one to use right away is to take those ideas and use like a impact effort matrix and say like, okay, these ideas are high impact, low effort. They might be kind of more quick fixes that we could start tackling right away. And these other ideas are high impact, but high effort. We might need to do a little thinking about how we can get the resources aligned to be able to do those high impact, high effort ones. And then you might realize there's some ideas that are kind of cool, but they might not move the needle that much on the experience. They might be in that sort of low impact
Yeah.
area quadrant. So that's one way I would start. Another thing that I think Lisa and Jenna's teams did a really good job of after customer journey mapping is to really organize those opportunities for improvement into specific initiatives and projects that would help us achieve those initiatives. So kind of turning the journey map into like a set of North Star goals of like, okay, to have a better look, customer experience than this map is showing, we want the customer to experience this, this, and this. To be able to do that, we'd like a project that solves for these specific pain points. So kind of creating a customer experience strategic roadmap of taking these ideas and like mapping them out. What do we have to do first, next, and in the future to improve that journey that we've just kind of visualized?
Thank you, Tori. I'm going to squeeze in one more question, and I'm going to have to leave one behind, but I can follow up with that person. So our last question here, about a minute to respond. During COVID, there was an urgency to move all services online. Do you think this took away from the user experience and removed the process to have human interaction, like with inspections? Rich question. Very good question.
It is a rich question. Um, I think yes and no. Um, yeah, I think that there will always be a user group that craves human interaction. Um, and and I think that that brings some of the humanness back to government. Um, I think we're living in an era where it's really easy to just demonize the other. And there's people behind all these processes that care about their jobs, that care about the work they're doing. And sometimes they're doing the best with the limited resources they have. But people see that shine through when they're talking to you one-on-one, when they're on the phone, when they're at the counter talking to somebody, when they're out in the field. Um, I think that there's always going to be a need for that. And but right, there's also the other side of the coin that like there's so much that our digital processes can do to make us more efficient and speed things up. And so actually I think the answer is more like how do we meet all of our user base's needs like where they're at? Because my team out here, if I have a older constituent come in that it is like a Luddite, I'm not gonna like be like, do you go fill out your application online? I'm gonna like have probably a person sit down with them and help them through the process. And that's a great experience for them.
Yeah.
What
Thank
do
you,
you
Jenna.
think, Lisa, as someone else in government?
Exactly. Our SDCI, my department, has really grappled with this exact thing where we converted all of our applicant services center to a virtual center during COVID, and then have tried to reintroduce the in-person experiences for those key users that really need it, either because they're not familiar or comfortable with technology, or this is just the most comfortable way of interacting. But I think your point, Jenna, is really, really important, that there's a lot of resources and time that's spent doing these in-person services that if we can find a lot more efficiencies, that time can be used and kind of redeployed for more of those other things that we need, where there is the coaching or the one-on-one interactions, versus repeating the same thing over and over to a very common question, for example. And having the written record is also really nice and important. So there's some pros and cons. I don't think that we've hit the right beautiful medium, point. But we're working on it. And I think there are just pros and cons. There's equity issues both ways, making people drive downtown, pay for parking, wait in line. I mean, that's a bit of a luxury to expect people to do. And if you happen to be working in a downtown high rise, that's easy. Not so easy for other people. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of factors involved that I think we're all kind of still trying to find the sweet spot.
I love both your answers. I see a lot of hearts come up here. Thank you for sharing that. Unfortunately, I am going to have to wrap us up. I feel like I could keep going with all three of you. As we wrap up, I hope you leave with this. You do not have to guess why a service is not working for your customers. And when you stop looking at it from the inside out and start seeing it through the eyes of your customers, usually what needs to change becomes pretty clear and the solutions will surface for you. So that's really the value of journey mapping. It helps you move past assumptions and understand what people are actually experiencing so you know where and how to change things. To help you put all of this in practice, please, everyone joining us, keep an eye on your inbox this week. We're going to be sending out a copy of the recording as well as a journey mapping checklist and guide that we put together so you can start your first map. We are also offering one-on-one office hours. So if you have a project underway, we'd be happy to help and offer advice. Thank you, Jenna, Lisa, Tori, for sharing your experience today. Thank you for all the work you're doing in public service and making things easier for customer. And everyone still online with us, thank you for joining. We hope to see you at a future webinar. Thank you so much.
Thanks, all.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.